Bethany, I am so fired up about this conversation today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I am delighted to be here and bring this topic to life.
It's really an important one. I think navigating the healthcare system can be so challenging, but it is even more challenging for women. The stats are there. I think the best place to start for us today is to go back into your earliest experience with the medical system and how it started to inform the work that you do today.
Absolutely. So, my journey actually goes way back to whenever I was a child. My mom had a very rare illness that for 8+ years, no doctor could diagnose. So, she had symptoms where she would just lose control of her muscles. She would collapse. She wouldn't be able to speak. Anytime she did try, her speech was slurred. And then there were instances where she would even stop breathing. And we spent a large portion of my childhood in doctor's offices, in hospitals, having every test run imaginable and coming up empty and having doctors tell her that it was all in her head because they could not find an explanation. And this went on for 8 years. We went from having my mom, who was working two jobs and really the primary breadwinner in our family, to not being able to work and not even being able to get disability because there was no diagnosis at all. And so we lost her income overnight. My dad actually had to take a job in a completely different state to make up for that income. And that left me home alone as a primary caregiver for my mom around 8 to 10 years old. And so I navigated the healthcare system at a very early age, and I watched the constant dismissal of the doctors. And it took 8+ years. We ended up at Mayo Clinic, and finally, we were able to get an answer that she had hypokalemic periodic paralysis, a very rare condition. But it was interesting because if you looked back at her medical charts, all of the symptoms, whenever you looked there and the test results were there. Nobody had bothered to piece it together or to think that
Mhm.
this could be a very rare illness. And unfortunately, even once we had that diagnosis, right, there's no way to go back and pick up the pieces of somebody telling you that it's all in your head. And that has led, to my mom even today being very wary of doctors and not wanting to go in because how can you trust a system that has dismissed you? And it's interesting because that was my first experience with healthcare. So I always had a passion for it and wanting to improve the system for other women. I actually went into college with the intention of being a doctor myself. And I realized freshman year just how bad I actually was at math and science. And so I figured nobody would want me as their doctor with that kind of terrible math skills that I had. So I ended up finding a different path that really merged with my skills, and that was becoming a lawyer. And so I started out in corporate law, and I went in, I did a healthcare master's of law degree as well to really focus on healthcare. Worked in corporate law, big law in Washington, D.C. for numerous years, and ended up taking a step back and going to teach law at my alma mater. And what I found when I was there, it was around 2018, was the term Femtech. I had never heard it before, really excited about it whenever I found out about it, and nobody was talking about it at that time. And so I dug in, I did scholarship on it, and I thought, this has the potential to transform women's healthcare, but I can't sit here on the sidelines and just do theoretical writings about it. I want to be in the trenches, actually helping startups build these products that can revolutionize how we care for women. So went back into into the practice of law and ended up, it was very interesting. I ended up working with a lot of startup companies. And at that time, I actually had my own women's health issue very unexpectedly. And it turned out that I had fibroids, which they found on a routine annual exam. But they were so large that I was the equivalent of about 6 months pregnant, and they were crushing my internal organs, and I had 6+ of them. And nobody had found it on any other annual exam. I was always very cognizant and conscious of my health. And looking back, I could see that all of my symptoms were ignored by doctors. There was a period of several years where I would gain weight and nobody would be able to tell me why. I saw nutritionists, doctors, etc. And everybody said, well, eat less, exercise more, which I did. Oh, that didn't work. We don't know why. Keep eating less, right? Reduce your stress. And nobody could explain to me why I was having stretch marks on my stomach, why all of these symptoms were happening, why I couldn't make it through the night without having to pee. Come to find out that I had those benign tumors growing inside of me. And this, of course, was at the height of COVID. And as somebody, right, who is very well versed in the medical system, I thought, I'm going to advocate for my care. I know how to navigate this system. I ended up back at Mayo Clinic because they were one of the only organizations that would be able to do a laparoscopic surgery for me at that point in time because of the size of the fibroids.
Mm.
So I went there. I had a 6+ hour surgery, and put that in perspective, that's longer than most routine heart surgeries that you have. Came out of that, and my doctor gave me 2 days of pain medications. And we called begging on the third and the fourth days for more medicine. Got a hold of the male resident, and he said, "Well, that shouldn't hurt that much."
Mm.
And I was just floored. I said, "Why don't you come here and let me carve into your organs in 6 different spots, and then we'll have a conversation about how much this quote unquote should hurt." And really, that just lit a fire under me, having my own pain dismissed, having thought that I knew how to navigate this healthcare system. And I just thought we cannot accept this status quo for women any longer. And so that's how I ended up where I am today with Feminnovation, with the book, and really trying to make sure that we make progress for women's health, and that we're not, unfortunately, subjecting, our daughters and the people who come after us to the same system that thinks it's okay to neglect us.
Okay, so much to unpack there. I'm so sorry that was your experience for your mom. And I'm so sorry that you had that experience as well. But I think the stories you're telling are going to be incredibly relatable to so many women. I've had women write in and say, I'm in my late 60s. I feel totally unseen and invisible. I can't get the care that I need. I don't even know where to go anymore. And people feel frustrated. Some of the stats you wrote in the book, you said that. Um, Even when women know something is wrong, they are dismissed, and 45% are labeled as chronic complainers. I'm not laughing because it's funny. It makes me so uncomfortable that I sometimes laugh because otherwise I think I'd just be breaking out and either screaming or crying. And 70% of women say they've been gaslit by medical providers and told it's all in their head or they are under stress. And as you also note, we leave with more questions oftentimes after an appointment than when we started. And so there's clearly a systemic problem throughout the healthcare system. I say that also with a great amount of gratitude and respect for doctors, nurses, everyone in the healthcare industry, because I feel like it's also very dysfunctional. They get 10 minutes with you. They've got to like diagnose everything. They worry about liabilities. Like
Oh, yeah.
there's so many layers. And you had fibroids and you were bringing it to the attention of doctors and still not getting the answers that you were looking for, and then made to feel like it was you when you were right because we know our bodies. So tell us more about, you said you knew how to advocate for yourself, which is interesting, and you still ended up with it. So how does somebody advocate? Where do they begin, Bethany?
Oh, it is such a challenge because you can think that you know everything there is about the healthcare system, and still it can happen to you. So in terms of advocacy, I think there's a couple important parts to consider. The first I always go with is, do you have a healthcare provider that you feel like you can trust, that you feel like you can go in and say exactly what you feel or how, what symptoms you have, what you think might be going on, and they'll listen and take you seriously. And I can tell you the majority of women, unfortunately, do not have that relationship with their healthcare provider. And
Yeah.
it took me a long time. I have actually, I had a longstanding healthcare provider for, oh my gosh, she was a family one. We had her for 10 plus years. And then we had to switch. And I went through 3 or 4 healthcare providers, even within the concierge medicine area. And 3 or 4 before I found one that I felt comfortable and thought, yeah, I can go and I can talk to her every single day. And it was interesting because one of the providers I actually was actually body shaming me at the time. And it was a male provider, and had body shamed me during my annual physical, even when I thought things had been going great. I was losing weight after the surgery. My labs were all great. And he body shamed me. And I just thought, I would rather go to an urgent care for a sinus infection or a cold than come and see you. And that's not the relationship that I want with my doctor. And so I would say continue first, to fight to find that right provider. A lot of us feel like, oh, we're going to hurt their feelings, right? Or, it's going to be uncomfortable if we say we're switching providers. It's not about the healthcare provider. It's absolutely about you and your comfort level. Because if you're not comfortable explaining your symptoms and what's going on, it could unfortunately, be something that's life-threatening, and your life could be the risk and, the price that you pay. So first of all, don't think about what your healthcare provider wants. Always think about what you want, and is this the right relationship? The second thing I also say about advocacy is knowing how to present the case to your provider is really important because, as you mentioned, Michelle, right, you get 10 minutes with that provider in most instances, if you're lucky, 15. And so it can be difficult, right, if you have kind of a broad range of symptoms or things that are bothering you, to know how do you present that in a cohesive way that's going to get your concerns heard and in
Mm.
a way that's going to inspire, follow-up testing or whatever needs to be done. And so I always advocate coming in and almost thinking about it like a lawyer. How would you present a case, right? If you had to go before a judge and say, "Hey, these are my symptoms and this is the outcome that I want." And of course, you don't have to write lengthy legal briefs, right, or anything like that, but think about summarizing your symptoms in kind of a 1 to 2 paragraph maximum, page. Start with the most severe. What is bothering you? What is actively preventing you from living your life? Start with
Yes.
those most severe symptoms. And then, of course, add in the others, right? But also make sure that you include the important details like when did it start? How is it impacting your life? Because if you can show a quality of life decline, that's going to make a provider take you more seriously than just saying, "Hey, I'm not sleeping very well," versus "I'm not sleeping well, and that means that I can't function throughout my day. I'm having to take a nap at noon during my work hours, and by the end of the day, I'm unable to cook dinner." That can be a lot more powerful. So, thinking through
Yes.
that, when your symptoms started, if you have any data from wearables as well to incorporate into that summary, that can also be powerful. I will say that doctors are divided on their use of, wearables and digital health data, but having that data can also provide you with the support to say, "Hey, something's off, right? My wearable shows that my sleep patterns have gone from 8 hours uninterrupted to I'm waking up every 2 hours." That can just add support for your claim. So write all of that down, 1 to 2 paragraphs, right? Keep it as short as you can. And then in the end, state what you want to have happen. And you don't have to know the specific tests that you want or anything like that. That's not your job. But if you think this is something that, hey, maybe some blood tests, hormone checks, right? Things like that would be helpful. Or if there are specific illnesses that you're worried about, because we all know that we Google, make sure that you add that to the list. And that way, whenever you go to your doctor, you have a prepared summary that you can start with, and you're not going to get all jumbled up right when they ask what's wrong. And you say, "Oh my gosh, I haven't thought this through. Where do I start?" It's
Yes.
written there. And you have an end game and a plan of action, which you can reiterate and say, "This is where I'd like us to go. What else do you recommend?"
Okay, this is so good. And actually, now we're using ChatGPT. We're not even going to Google anymore, which I
Exactly.
think hopefully is a little bit more reliable based on the data. You had done a post where you talked about what the standard of care is. This
Yes.
was really interesting. Can you explain standard of care and what there's like a specific thing we can request be
Yeah.
added to our charts if we're not being heard? So walk us through this.
Yes. So many people come and they ask me, "Hey, is it okay if my doctor dismisses me? Or is there anything I can do if they dismiss me? Or
Yeah.
can they even legally dismiss me?"
Or
Right?
label, like you
Or
said,
label.
chronic
Yes,
complainers, that gets in your chart sometimes.
it does. It does. And what do you do when that happens? So the first thing to know, right, is that the standard of care is what doctors are held to. It differs, state by state, jurisdiction by jurisdiction. And it doesn't mean that you're getting the best care, right? That you're getting the care that an A+ student at medical school, who graduated with honors would give you. It means that you're getting the average standard of care that an average doctor in a similar circumstance and situation would have done.
Okay.
And that is the standard that doctors are held to. So if, your A+ doctor would have ordered XYZ tests, but your average C-level doctor says, "Hey, A test is good," then unfortunately that's the standard they're held to, and it's not going to be medical neglect or malpractice for not having ordered those additional tests. And so we have to go into our healthcare interactions with this in mind and always knowing to advocate for ourselves. Unfortunately, sometimes whenever we ask questions, right, or we push for certain tests, we can be labeled complainers, we can be labeled as difficult,
Uh-huh.
and
Or
in a
all in your
all
head.
in your head,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. You think something's wrong with you, but there's not. I can tell you. And then in your
Right.
case and so many others, you were right.
You're right, exactly. And when that happens, whenever you feel like a doctor is dismissing you or
Yeah.
not taking you seriously, I always tell patients to say, "Can you please note in my medical record that I have asked for additional testing and it's been declined?" And that phrase is very powerful because it's not going to label you as difficult. What it's going to do is it's going to put the burden back on the doctor to either explain to you why that testing isn't necessary, which is what you want, right? Because you want to be informed. Most likely, it's going to cause the doctor to rethink their position and order the test for you anyway, even if they disagree, because once they have that notation in the medical record, that sets them up for liability because it shows that you asked for something specific and they denied it. And if it turns out that that test, right, or that diagnosis would have been identifiable from from that interaction, from what you asked, that can be very powerful proof for medical malpractice and negligence. So sometimes, sometimes a doctor is still going to hold fast, right, and say, no, I'm not going to do it. I'll put the notation in your medical record instead. Other times it's going to
And then
cost.
they're going to add in, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Yes.
It's all in her head. That's why. You know what I mean? Like worried well, chronic complainer, hypo.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And, and if you do request that, even if you don't request that language, right, but you want to know, what are they saying about me in my medical record? I
Yeah.
always recommend that you ask for a copy of your medical records, including the doctor notes and comments. And you have a right under HIPAA to access your medical record and to know what is written about you. And so I always say, ask for that. Sometimes, your doctor is not going to be able to just turn that over themselves. Typically, you'll have to go through a records department for the healthcare organization. But
Hmm.
once you have that, take a look and see if there's any of those types of notations in your medical record. And if there are, you have a right legally to request amendment and then removal of information that's inaccurate. And I would absolutely request an amendment in those circumstances.
In writing, well, they'll probably tell you how to do it if you can do that. Okay, this is all really helpful. I think going back a little bit, in terms of the historical context of how women have been treated, unfortunately, and how we've been excluded from research and so many things. There was a story you told in the book that made me a little sick to my stomach that I hadn't heard of. So maybe you can give us the story in your words again about is it Dr. Sims?
Yes.
So who he tell us what he invented and how we're still using something that was invented in 1845 to this day and hasn't been updated. Like I think this is really important in terms of understanding that women have been sort of neglected and they just assume, oh, either we're complainers and we're not taken seriously, but when we try to advocate, it's like there's a reason. And I feel like a disruption is happening, but it's still slow. And
Yeah.
that's why these kinds of conversations are important. So tell us about Dr. Sims.
Absolutely. So it's very interesting whenever we think about women's health, a lot of people don't realize that it's actually based on a lot of male doctors experimenting on women. And that happens for J. Marion Sims, who is actually kind of the father of modern gynecology. So whenever we say, Dr. Sims, we're talking about an individual who experimented on women in order to create what has become known, right, as the speculum. And so, really, right, that speculum, every woman has, unfortunately, most likely by now, had a pelvic exam, right? And so, the speculum that they're using to open up the cervix, that is from 1845. And there has been very little innovation.
So funny.
There are some companies that are coming out now by women who are replacing, the speculum and making it so that it is more compatible with our bodies. But interestingly, that's not the only thing he did, sadly, but so he created that and he tested it on women. Oftentimes they were slaves at that time. And he and other individuals would experiment on them for other types of surgeries during this time as well. And it was very, very, it's uncomfortable. And I will say for anybody who does, if there's any kind of, trigger warnings here, but, what he would do is he would enter their bodies, with the medical tools. And if it was unfortunately a black slave, he would not use anesthesia because there was the common, prevailing thought at the time was that unfortunately black women did not experience pain the way that white women did. And so even when they were screaming, he would perform surgical techniques trying to repair vesicovaginal fistulas. And so that can be, for those who aren't familiar, it's a complication that can occur after childbirth that leaves women incontinent. And
Mm-hmm.
he would do that with male doctors standing around trying to learn the techniques. And he would do this multiple times on women, trying different techniques, different experiments on them. One time, it was so bad that he had used a sponge to drain urine from one of their bladders, and it led the individual to contract blood poisoning. So this is the, kind of foundation upon which women's health has been built. And now, right, we see, and he is celebrated as the father of modern gynecology. So his innovations, as I mentioned, we have the speculum, we have the surgical repair of the fistulas, and those were cornerstones of women's health care. And what we don't hear about, right, is all that suffering, the exploitation, the dehumanization of all of those individuals that he experimented on to get us where they are. And it's very interesting, right, because we think, okay, 1845, we have to have moved away from that by now, right? We're not still experimenting on women. There's a very interesting parallel, I will say, that still happens today. So, for instance, if you're undergoing any type of, kind of reproductive health surgery, what is coming to light right now is that there have actually been medical exams being performed on women going in for surgery by, medical students or interns, pelvic exams, those sorts of things without consent. And that is unfortunately still happening today. There have been very recent articles written about it. And it is, it's just a parallel to having us be experimented on back in 1845, and yet our bodies are still being experimented on without our knowledge today. It's very distressing that this still occurs.
I noted that actually. I was going to ask you about that. Is that state specific or is it the teaching hospitals specific? I mean, that seems to go contrary to any sort of uh, laws of autonomy, body privacy, like HIPAA law, like anything dealing with our health. It just seems to be completely contrary. So I could not believe that when I read that.
It is insane. It's not limited to one specific state. It's with teaching hospitals, sometimes they have, it could be technically be more prevalent there, but oftentimes because it's a teaching hospital, their waivers may be a little bit more explicit.
Hmm.
But it is so sad to see this happening. And sometimes it even occurs whenever a woman is going in for a completely unrelated surgery. I have heard stories of, somebody going in, it might be for a chest surgery, right, or a sinus surgery. And while she's under anesthesia, doing the pelvic exam as well.
I'm literally speechless. It makes me so angry. So again, do you have to go in and say, I explicitly don't want any other, and then if you ask that, they're probably going to be like, what are you talking about? We would never do that again and make you gaslight you. But what can you do to protect yourself? Because that's horrifying.
Oh, it's horrifying, right? And it's not, and I want to make this clear, it's not just a handful of people that this has happened to. There was actually a study that estimated it was more than 3.5 million patients who had been given pelvic exams without their consent.
In the
So
United States.
in the United States, yep. It is very, very unfortunate. And, there was another study that was conducted that said about 92% of people, medical students who responded to this survey actually reported having done a pelvic exam on an anesthetized female patient. And 61% said that they did so without explicit patient consent.
What percent?
61%.
Who would consent to that? Who would
Ex-
consent to that? I don't think there's a
Right.
woman that would consent to that.
Exactly. And yet they think it's okay to keep doing that to our bodies while we're unconscious and under anesthesia.
What can you cite where that was from? Do you know where that was from? If somebody wanted to look this up, Bethany?
Absolutely. So there are a couple of different studies. So one is in Science News.
Hmm.
So it was an April 2024 article in Science News that looked at that. And then so that was one of them. And then there was another one that was done in in June 2019 as well.
And is
So
that investigative? So I don't want to say that people won't take it as seriously, Science News versus like Elle Magazine, but they obviously had to cite their sources.
exactly. Yep. All of the sources should be fully cited in there. And it is just crazy that this continues to happen today. And that, even whenever you have the written consent, and sadly, usually those written consents are very broad, right? So I always, before I go into surgery, before any family members I have go into surgery, I 100% read the consents. I do not let them try to present me with any consents the day of the procedure.
Mm.
And I actually did have that happen very, very recently to me for something unrelated. But I always demand to see it beforehand. I read through it carefully, and I do not consent to any language that's vague that says, right, other, medical students, practitioners, etc., may come in to assist with the procedure. I always make them explicitly state the exact doctors that are going to be in there. And unfortunately, we still see cases like this happening.
It's horrifying. There's actually a comedian that I saw on Instagram, and she's very funny. And she takes like sort of everyday relatable stuff. And there's one where she takes like a ladder and she's like a guy pretending to be a gynecologist. And then she's like, bring in the 74, the students, bring them all in. Everybody come in, and you laugh because it's so relatable.
Yeah,
And it's like, okay, scooch, scooch, she's doing the whole thing. She's like, it's just going to feel like a little pinch, and
right.
trying to make light of it. But it's not funny to know that it's actually gone to this level. Like, no, I think this is going to be news to everyone listening. Until I read that in your book, I would have had no reason to be even thinking about those kinds of things. If somebody you or someone you love is going in for surgery, you just want everything to go smoothly, not have any issues with the, anesthesia, and that they come out and heal well. You're not thinking about them being used as, test subjects.
No, and I will say, recently I underwent an egg freezing procedure. I get in there, right? I'm back in for pre-op. They're trying to take my blood pressure, and at the same time, the nurse is handing me a consent form with all of the risks and trying to tell me all the risks. And I'm like, no, we're not doing this at this particular point in time. You're going to take the blood pressure cuff off. You're going to give me the document. I'm going to read it. You'll walk away for 10 minutes and you can come back and I'll let you know if I have any questions. But I'm not going to have my vital signs being read while I'm trying to understand a legally binding document while you're standing here pressuring me to just sign it while the blood pressure cuff is on.
That's also an important takeaway. Take the ownership, take control. It's your body. You are the patient and you are paying. We are paying fortune in healthcare, insurance, and then for these procedures and everything. So I think, and we always, not always, generally speaking, women go in and we're so apologetic and Dr. Elizabeth Coleman came on talking about her book All in Her Head and women dying of cancer, apologizing for sweating in an appointment. We're so accommodating and it needs to actually shift because guys go in and it's a totally different dynamic.
Absolutely.
Give us some of those stats. Do you have any of those,
You
Bethany?
know, you know, it's very interesting because what you mentioned, I found myself doing the same thing during my egg freezing procedure. I was actually having, some breakthrough bleeding. And that was the first thing out of my mouth was, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. Do you have, a pad you can put down, anything like that? These are professionals who see this all the time, every single day. The first words out of my mouth and your mouth should not be, I'm sorry, but they should be, I'm having this, breakthrough bleeding is, the end, right? Period. You let them know, and then you move on with your discussion. The number of times that we apologize is astounding. And I
Yeah.
will say it is, whenever we talk about the differences between male and female recognition within the healthcare system, it's astonishing because males and females can experience the exact same symptoms, the exact same pain, and males are going to be believed more often than females, unfortunately. And what that results in is not only dismissal of our pain, it means that we get less pain medication. We get it later while we're waiting in the ER having the same symptoms. We might get it 10 to 15 minutes later than what they'll give it to a man. It also means that we're not taken seriously. And what does that mean? Later diagnoses, if you're diagnosed at all. And we see this particularly prevalently in cardiovascular care, where women's, signs of heart attacks are dismissed to the point where we have a much higher risk of dying because of the care that we receive. And it's unfortunate, but modern medicine is founded on the male body. And so
Yes.
the female body, really, when you think about it, it's seen only as a deviation of the male body. And 9 out of 10 times, it is seen as a deviation of the male body and only being different in the reproductive organs, which, as we all know, is absolutely not true. And that's why so often we're dismissed.
Interesting, Bethany, because there's a doctor that was recently on the show and she said, you know, it's up to the women to figure out their like what they need to some degree. And I agree with her. And when you go to the doctor, asking for the information, asking for the bone density scan, even though you're not 65 yet, and that's when insurance pays for it, but you want to get a baseline, and then you find out data, and they're not giving you more information about what to do. You are still piecing it all together anyway. And medicine operates in silos. So, what your general practitioner versus what your gynecologist versus what an endocrinologist, right? Versus another, your heart doctor, everybody's seeing you through their specialization, which is amazing. We're so blessed to have the richness of all of this, right? All of these specialties. And
Yep.
sometimes you don't know what to do with, and there may be conflicting information coming back from different practitioners. So,
Yes.
yes, we need to take ownership, and we should be able to rely a little bit more on the system than
Oh, yeah.
than we are able oftentimes, because we're not either believed, or
Yeah.
the follow-up isn't offered, or the data isn't given, or you're handed a piece of paper and you're like, okay, I don't really understand what this is. This may make sense to you, but I don't really understand what this is telling me.
It's very sad because, and I hate to make this comparison, but when I take my dog to the vet and when I take him to see different specialists, right? He recently had to go see a neurological consult and an ortho consult. He got more comprehensive care and, coordinated back with the primary care vet who then coordinated to us and explained what everything meant and what follow-up to do, et cetera. Got more comprehensive care and instructions than we do as human
I
beings.
think that's right.
I
I
mean,
have a dog now. I agree with you. It's
yeah.
very, and they know a lot, and they studied certain things, like these breeds of dogs don't do well with certain vaccines. So, like, or
Yes.
these certain medications don't, like they know a lot about that stuff. Like,
We know nothing about women's bodies when it comes to that. We're like, well, good luck. We've tested this drug on, 100% male participants. So sure, it's going to work the same in a female body, no questions asked.
right. And yeah. Well, let's stay on that then. So, in terms of existing problems, you wrote, for example, 10 drugs were removed from the market. This was between 1997 and 2000, so not that long ago, with eight causing severe reactions in women and four of them more likely to cause death. What?
Yep.
What? Like crazy. And then you said the CDC says that 4 out of 5 pregnancy related deaths are preventable, yet that there are still 50,000 women suffering life threatening complications from childbirth annually. And as of 2022, forced sterilization is still legal in 31 states. Like things are still happening like now that we would think we would have caught up. Fine, we're talking about the historical stuff, but no, it hasn't advanced enough or as quickly. Do you know what those drugs were, by the way?
I don't have them off the top of my head,
It's
but
just
I'm
curious.
happy
Like, are
to.
they still available? Like, are women still prescribed
Uh,
this stuff?
Some of them are, some of them were taken off the market whenever it was found out that they caused more harm to women in an exponentially greater manner. But right, but all of that comes down to the fact that we don't understand women's bodies. And part of that is because we were neglected from clinical research for so long. There were actually policies in place that prevented us from going into clinical research and having, being able to test those drugs on our bodies. And so now we have a huge knowledge gap when it comes to women's health and data that
Yep.
we're still trying to fix. And it's
Yes.
not moving fast enough, I will say. I mean, we have huge gaps. And when we look at where we are today, for instance, when I had my fibroid surgery, that was 4 or 5 years ago. And I look at the innovations today and I think there has to be something else out there because unfortunately my fibroids have returned. I'm at a situation, where I'm looking at what are my next steps. And I look at my options and I will say they're almost the exact same as they were 4 to 5 years ago. And it's not because innovation's not out there. It's not because people aren't working on products. They are. Obviously, regulatory approvals take time, but they're not getting funded at a rate that is going to be high enough and fast enough to bring those products to market in any type of timely manner. And sometimes, because of the way that funding is for women's health right now, they may not even see the market at all.
Absolutely. And I'm going to just mention one more thing, and I really want to get into the femtech, but I was getting a mammogram, which we all do, and I remember joking to the nurse, I'm like, I think a man must have invented this technology, because I'm thinking to myself, like, if a guy had to go through something similar, they would have figured out a new way to do this yesterday. So, yes, I know it's important. And she was like, this is really important technology. I'm like, yes. And it's
Yeah.
deeply uncomfortable and feels like it's going to crack my ribs any minute. You know what I mean? Not in addition to how my breasts feel. Like, so yes, and you know what I mean? There's a more to this conversation. We can't just be like, this saves lives or whatever. What can we be innovating and doing better? And I think this is where women come in. And you mentioned in 2018, you discovered this world of femtech. So tell my audience, because this is a newer field in technology that I'm not familiar with either. What is femtech?
Yes. So femtech is a newer term. It was coined in 2016. And when we talk about femtech, we're talking about female health technology, right? So this could be anything from your period tracking apps, any type of wearable that's designed for women's health or women's bodies. But it also isn't limited to just those digital health tools. It can be things that we're seeing coming on the market now, like innovative blood tests to develop, to be able to diagnose ovarian cancer at early stages. It can be a new medical bra that allows women not to have to unrobe or, get naked for MRIs and X-rays. It can
Oh,
be, there are new tampons coming out that can test for cervical cancer. And so femtech is really this broad, encompassing term that really means any type of new health technology that's designed for women's healthcare and women's bodies. So very broad. Names that you might recognize in this space would be things like Clue, Flow, Thinks, Nix. Maven Clinic is a big one right now. They can include, right, those kind of digital and telehealth platforms that we're
hmm.
seeing come to life now, especially post-COVID.
Yes.
Huge range of products that are coming on the market, and they really span the entire field of women's healthcare. It's interesting because for the first couple of years, whenever femtech came out, it was largely reproductive healthcare products that were being invented. And now we're seeing this huge shift to things like cancer, ovarian health, breast health, cardiovascular health, and really recently, really seeing a lot of innovation in menopause and longevity and also mental health. So that's kind of at a high level what femtech means. And if you haven't heard of it, you're in good company because 89% of women actually have no idea that this entire industry that's built for them even exists.
Yeah. And so let's dive into this further. So I just want you to read from your book, pages 9 and 10. So when femtech products are being advertised, there tends to be censorship of the female products versus the male. So give us some of these advertising challenges that are there.
Absolutely. So part of the reason you have never heard about the term femtech is because a lot of the products out there are censored on social media and through Google search engines and things like that. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that women's health is still equated with pornography and sexual activity. So we can't even say words like vagina without being flagged as being pornographic, even though that is an anatomically correct term. And so the fact that there is this correlation that exists, it exists within the algorithms of Facebook, Instagrams, any type of social media, and also search engines, means that whenever you search for solutions, they're not popping up. And oftentimes, if they do pop up, it's because the founder has had to get really clever and has had to use fruit, right, or different types of words rather than what's anatomically correct and what you would expect to see in order to not get their account banned or blocked.
Ah,
If you're interested in this, I highly recommend checking out the Center for Intimacy Justice. They have done studies on this, and I'll read some of the ads that they have that I mentioned in my book. But follow along with them. They did a 2022 study and they found that 100% of femtech companies that were surveyed had had their ads rejected on platforms like Facebook and Instagram. And then half of those accounts had actually been suspended. And it's just because they address topics like breast cancer symptoms or menstruation facts or pelvic floor health or fibroids or endometriosis. Um, it's very interesting. So I'll read a couple of the advertisements that did get flagged and got blocked. One
for
of it said,
women, femtech.
for
Okay.
women in femtech.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
It takes 3.5 years to sail around the world. It takes 7 to 10 years to get an endometriosis diagnosis. That was blocked. 75% of women report experiencing pain with intimacy at some point, and it's a chronic problem for some. Learn more. Blocked. Many have already grabbed their spots for our breast and chest feeding workshops this week. If you're a new or expecting parent and would like to participate, make sure you register. Blocked.
Okay.
Don't wait another minute. You deserve to live your best life without embarrassing leaks. You can have stronger pelvic muscles and more bladder control in 2 weeks. Blocked.
Okay.
Now, what's very interesting is during the same time, let's take a look at men's advertisements for male products.
Please.
Unfortunately, these advertisements were oftentimes not blocked, they were permitted, and they're way more inappropriate than anything that I just read you from the women's health side. So here are some of the male products that were approved during the same time. Get hard or your money back. Say goodbye to nicks and snags while shaving your balls. Hard made easy. Empower your balls now. My husband is having sex with me for 2 hours straight and isn't getting tired. All approved, all on Facebook and Meta platforms, and yet we can't talk about endometriosis and fibroids and symptoms and educating women because that's pornographic.
Again, I'm speechless. I am speechless. For anyone who's watching on YouTube versus listening, I'm like literally like leaned back, like grabbing my face. Like I just,
Yeah.
I'm literally speechless.
And
I'm
this is
never
why,
speechless doing an interview. Like I'm frustrated, Bethany. Like this is insane.
and you're not the only one. All the founders of these products are experiencing this. They can't even get their products out there because of the censorship. There have been complaints filed with the FTC over these practices, and still the algorithms, the policies, et cetera, are biased towards women's health, and we're seen as nothing more than reproductive and sexual vessels.
Okay, ladies, this stops with us. Okay. So if that doctor's right and it's our responsibility, which, like I said, I agree. Okay. I agree. But the standard of care, as we know, is going to differ from practitioner to practitioner. You deserve to be heard, seen, taken seriously, and nobody knows your body better than you. Your intuition is correct. Something feels off. You are more than just entitled. You deserve to be given the tests and anything else that you need to get a diagnosis so that you don't end up like you. There's a sad story in the book where a woman you knew ended up dying because she wasn't taken seriously. And by the time it was diagnosed, was it stage 4 ovarian cancer?
It was, yep, stage 4 ovarian cancer for a 29-year-old, not taken seriously by her doctors, told it's too young. And that's even with having doctors in the family for her. And
I
it's,
know. That's so sad. Her
it
parents were
is so
doctors,
sad.
right?
Yeah, her parents were doctors, and is just heartbreaking to see that happen. And she's sadly not the only one. I read an article a couple weeks ago about a woman similar symptoms, had stage 4 breast cancer. Her doctor had told her she was too young to have a mammogram and tried to
Yeah.
cover it.
Well, we already know the sadly cancer is affecting women and men and
Yeah.
children younger and younger now. So you trust yourself. And as the mom, trust yourself. Bethany, your book is the Femtech Revolution book. So give us like, what are you excited about? How do we, you have a safe acronym about, because just because it's Femtech or it's for women, again, now there's privacy issues and other things that we have to be aware of. So what do you want us to be aware of as, about and know about Femtech?
Absolutely. Yes. So my book is The Femtech Revolution. It comes out September 23rd. And really, it is your behind the scenes guide for how to navigate this world of women's health technology. Because even though right now you know about Femtech, you know the products that are out there, that doesn't mean that all Femtech products are safe. It doesn't mean that all of them have your best interests in mind. Just like it doesn't mean, right, that all fitness apps and trackers have your best interests in mind. The tools and the acronyms that I provide in the book can actually be expanded to any type of health technology. So you should take this with you even when, using your Apple Watch, right, your Fitbit, things like that. But what the book really aims to do is to explain how we got where we are today for women's healthcare, what problems we're still having, the myths that we have in women's healthcare, why Femtech can really help to break us free, and then how you vet those products. Because right now there are no behind the scenes guides for how you actually vet this health technology. It all sounds really innovative, really cool. I love having the latest tech, but oftentimes what we don't realize is how much we're sacrificing to use these products. So what
Yes.
the book really goes into is the value of your health data and why it's one of the most valuable commodities you own, and you shouldn't just sign it away to any type of app without looking first at how they're protecting your privacy. It talks about how we should be evaluating privacy in the post Roe versus Wade era as well, given that a lot of reproductive health care is very state dependent now. How do we determine what those risks are? What's the highest risk to your data right now? Should you even be using these products? But it also really steps away from the fear-based mentality to looking at it practically and saying, here are the highest risks, and here's what you can do to mitigate those while still using tech that's going to help transform women's healthcare. Because the solution is not to just say, well, I'm afraid of how government might use my data, so I'm not going to use any health tech.
Right.
Because if we do that, we're not going to be promoting women's healthcare, and we're not going to be signaling to investors that we need innovation in this space when we desperately do.
And are they getting funded? Oh, go ahead. What were you going to
Yeah.
say? No, I
Oh,
want
no,
to hear what
no.
you're going to say more than the answer to that.
So I'll circle back on that then. And then what the book does is the SAFE method. So SAFE stands for security, accuracy, foundation, and equity. It's a four-prong approach for how you can evaluate any type of health tech product. Typically, it's going to take you 15 minutes or less with the tools in that book. The first couple times you use it, it might take longer just because you need to set out, right, your privacy preferences, how you want your data to be used, that type of thing. Once you get the hang of it, it's going to take you 15 minutes or less to vet a product. And so it looks for security, really focusing on privacy, the data security aspect. Accuracy, what is very interesting is that there are a lot of femtech apps out there that are not accurate. And so you're giving your data away and your information away, and what you're getting in return really is going to be hit or miss in terms of accuracy. So it talks through how you look at that. And there were actually studies that did this several years ago on period tracking apps, and they found that like 93% of like free period tracking apps were highly inaccurate. So that's what the accuracy looks at. Foundation looks at who's building the company so that you can make sure this isn't somebody just out to make a profit on women's healthcare, because this is a very profitable industry.
Hmm.
And then E is for equity, right? So how to make sure the products that we're using are going to be equitable across the entire female population. Not just, for the typical, right, heterosexual white experience, but for anybody else, all the minority groups out there, trans women, et cetera. How do we make sure that we're using products that are going to promote their interests as well? Because it all starts with us. And I will say, supporting, projects like these and femtech founders and women founders, it can actually make healthcare products better for men as well. There have been a lot of studies that have shown that if you design products to take into account women's needs and women's healthcare potentials, that innovation is going to have downstream benefits to men as well. I talk about that in my book. But Michelle, you asked, are these products being funded? They were. They still are to an extent, but women's health funding is egregiously low. We get less than 4% of all healthcare research and development funding for women's health in general, not just femtech, all of women's health in general. That's a very small number, and a lot of femtech companies right now are struggling because of the decline in funding, and because of the way that the economic situation is right now. And so, really, what's happening is investors are turning away from those products if women are not signaling that this is something that they want and something that they need. And so,
Hmm.
if we are not using our voices, if we're not voting with our dollars, we're not going to see innovation in women's healthcare. It all has to come from us. We have to be that driving change. We have to be fed up enough that this stops now.
I think women are fed up. They just don't necessarily know where to like collectively go for this stuff. And just, I want to, like you said, a lot of these apps that are free, I wrote about it in a newsletter. I did this, the idea of the attention economy. So what you're getting for free, access to these social media apps, access to these period tracking apps or whatever. Be careful because basically your attention, or in this case, your health data becomes something that that third party then can sell or
Yes.
be used against you. And I had heard about the Fitbit case. I remember about that, right? They sold the data, people's health data, right? And then 23andMe just went under and they're like, delete your data because now it's out there for anyone. Your DNA is like the roadmap to everything about you. You can be denied insurance. I mean, there's so many consequences to it.
There are, and yet people give it away so freely. To put it in perspective, right, we all freak out, right, when our credit card data is exposed, right? And we could potentially have identity theft for that. We
Yes.
start monitoring, right? On the black market, your health data goes for 50 times the amount as your credit card data. 50 times because that's how much more valuable it is. And yet we hand it away to any company that has a new shiny product without even thinking about it.
What can they do with it?
Oh my gosh, they can do so many things. They can obviously use it internally within their products, but what a lot of companies do, especially companies that have free apps, because you should always be thinking, how else are they making money?
Of course.
They are selling your data downstream. It can be going to data brokers who can then package that data and sell it off to anybody, you, me, etc., who wants to pay for it, law enforcement officers who want to pay for it. They're selling it to companies like Facebook, Meta, Google, all of that. And once your data, and this is very important too, because there's a huge misconception that HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, what people think, right? That's kind of the gold standard, right? That we have in the US protecting your healthcare data. Unfortunately, a lot of times HIPAA is not applicable to the data that you're putting into these healthcare apps. And so what's happening is that protection doesn't exist, and these apps can use that data however they want, sell it, distribute it, give it to any third party who wants to buy it. You cannot get it back. Once it's out there, it is out there.
And you can't get it back.
You
I
can't.
actually think that we all should own our medical data. What do you think about when the docs now ask, like if you do a video consult or you're in person, they want to use the AI? Do you say yes or no?
Oh my gosh, I hate the I hate the AI too. I know why they use it, right? It's easier for them to
That's what
develop,
they say.
right? That's what they say. But how is, and oftentimes those AI companies do have business associate agreements with the doctors, right, to be protecting your data. So it
Yes.
should, from a theoretical perspective of what should be happening, it should be
Just like a
risk-free.
no
It should
taking
be
app.
just like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
What is very unclear to me because I haven't seen those contracts, everyone has a different AI note taker, is how is that data then being used to train the AI algorithm downstream? Can my data potentially be being used in a way where it is re-identifiable in that training? That makes me uncomfortable.
Totally. And it knows your voice.
Exactly. And we've already seen what cyber criminals are doing with, voices that they're getting from TikTok or things like that, and the scams that they're running there, even calling people and pretending, right, to have family members in trouble. And unfortunately, we're just going to continue to see more and more of that.
Okay, we've covered so much. I literally had to let out an exhale because it's such an important conversation. I'm so grateful for everything you've shared. But is there anything I didn't ask that you want to make sure the women take away from the conversation we're having today and the work that you're doing in the world?
I think just to reiterate that this is our space, right? This is our health, our livelihoods that we're protecting. And if we don't demand better, nobody's going to demand better for us. So this is really the time to rise up. If you're looking for ways to get involved, we'll have a Femtech Revolution website. We're working to put together a full directory that's uncensored of all of the femtech and women's health products out there. So find us there. There are a lot of great initiatives that you can find on those websites, and I'm happy to point you to them as well to really start to rise up, to make our voices heard, and to demand change in this area.
And Bethany, will those ones be vetted, like are
Yes.
trustworthy, like they've gone through the safe protocol?
Yes, we're working to have a badge, right, or some kind of identifier so that we can show which ones, our team of experts has vetted. Not to say that ones that are unvetted, that they
Right.
aren't great, right? But that way there's at least some marker for consumers because right now we have no guideposts and we're really working to change that.
I am so grateful to you, and I think this is such an important conversation. Ladies, share this with every woman you know, every age, every woman. Let's get empowered, take ownership. Let's stop apologizing, go in with clarity, like Bethany said. Here's facts, and it oftentimes though, when you're sitting and you're feeling vulnerable, your health is at stake, you are emotional. You are not hysterical, you are human. And
Yeah.
we express differently than men, and we should, and that's okay. So take back your power. Go follow Bethany. Where do I direct them, Bethany? And where do they find the book? At least there's women like you out there, and these companies that are, starting up to change the way that we receive healthcare and the way that we're treated.
Oh, yes. And for anyone interested in supporting the Femtech revolution, you can find it on on any of those stores that you typically would buy books, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million. It's right there. You can also follow me at Femtech Lawyer on Instagram and also femtechlawyer.com. We have a page for the book there as well, where you can learn more about the SAFE method and a lot of the other resources that we're offering. And then we'll be working and hopefully partnering with Rescripted to get that Femtech database up and running towards the end of the year.
Nice. Thank you. Such a pleasure. Really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you, Bethany.
Thank you so much for having me.